Why was Christopher Columbus a crook? Because he double-crossed the Atlantic. Yuck! Shouted Mr. Matoos. The doorknob rattled as he tried to turn it. The class cracked up. They say that laughter is the best medicine. If that's so, then call me the doctor. I was the one who had put Vaseline on the outside doorknob. My brother, Jimmy, taught me that Vaseline was a practical joker's best friend. I don't even want to tell you what Jimmy taught me about Vaseline in a toilet seat. Mrs. Harris, could you give me a paper towel, quickly? We could hear Mr. Matoos yelling to the other fifth-grade teacher from outside the door. What did you do? Janine asked. Janine is my best friend. She looked worried, but that wasn't unusual for her. Relax, I said. He'll never be able to prove it was me. Vaseline tells no tales. Bobby, shouted Mr. Matoos, still on the other side of the door. Janine giggled. Can't prove it was you, huh? Who else would it be? Yesterday, you put green food dye in the science experiment. I think he'll have a clue. Mr. Matoos came into the classroom, wiping his hand. Bobby, he said, shaking his head. Me? What did I do? I put on my most innocent face. My brother, Jimmy, taught me another thing. Never confess. If you don't confess, adults will always wonder if maybe they're wrong. Of course, this tactic didn't help when they kicked Jimmy out of high school. He was running a gambling ring, real gambling, not just penny poker. He used the high school computers to set up his very own webpage so that customers could place bets. Adults aren't concerned with your not confessing when they have proof of your guilt. Janine raised her hand and tried to defend me. Mr. Matoos, it didn't have to be Bobby. There weren't fingerprints on the Vaseline or anything. Mr. Matoos threw the paper towel into the waste paper basket. Janine, there's such a thing as circumstantial evidence. Anyhow, Bobby, let's try for a clean slate, or at least a clean doorknob. Mr. Matoos can be pretty funny. He likes to laugh. Some teachers don't, but when you get one who does, you're golden. It's Mr. Matoos' first year of teaching. He's the kind of teacher who thinks all kids are worth saving. Everybody in the class knows that I'm the type of kid who is too much for Mr. Matoos to handle. It's made for an interesting year. Hand your homework assignments up to the front, said Mr. Matoos. My classmates were smirking. I could tell they were just waiting for what I would do next. I wouldn't disappoint them. I always come up with something. One by one, my classmates gave their homework to Mr. Matoos. Everyone except me. Bobby, said Mr. Matoos. He sounded tired. Did you do your homework? No, I admitted. I did some other kids' homework. The class tittered. Bobby, that joke is so old it has mold on it, said Mr. Matoos. The class laughed hysterically. That's what I love about Mr. Matoos. He's as funny as I am. Quiet, he shouted. It wasn't that funny. Bobby, this is the third time in a row that you haven't done your homework. What's the problem? It's not a good time in my life for homework right now. The class cracked up again. Now, what exactly does that mean? Asked Mr. Matoos. I mean, there's a lot going on at home right now. I don't have time for homework. Mr. Matoos looked confused. I tend to have that effect on teachers. Class, open your history books and review the chapter on Columbus's first encounters with the Native Americans, he said. He came down the aisle and stood in front of my desk with a concerned look on his face. What's happening at home that's keeping you from doing your homework? He asked softly. If there's really a problem, you know that you can come to me. I thought about it. First-year teachers are such suckers for hard luck stories. I could tell him about Jimmy's fight with my parents after he got kicked out of school. I looked out the window. It was a cold March day. I was supposed to meet Jimmy after school. Jimmy's almost 18, 8 years older than me. He's staying with a friend. I miss him. Home is not exactly a barrel of laughs without Jimmy. He left home, and my parents won't ask him back. They call it tough love, but it seems like tough luck to me. I can just imagine what will happen to me when I step out of line. The wind was blowing. A gust of wind hit a piece of newspaper and sent it tumbling up into the air, as if the laws of gravity had been turned upside down. What problems? Repeated Mr. Matoos. Seriously, Mr. Matoos, I said in a loud voice so the other kids could hear. I would have done my homework, but there was a problem in my house. They cut off the gravity. Dad forgot to pay the bill. He's very absent-minded. I could hear some of my classmates giggling. It was a sound I loved. Cut off the gravity, repeated Mr. Matoos. Most adults would ask, is that supposed to be a joke? Not Mr. Matoos. He was having a hard time keeping a straight face. Yeah, Things are pretty up in the air right now. I love it when jokes come to me. I'd have to add this one to my notebook. I write down the best jokes that I've heard or made up. I've got a whole shelf full of books on how to be a comic, and they all say the same thing. Keep a notebook with you at all times to jot down ideas. But this idea was more than just a joke. I wish something like that could really happen, gravity cutting off. All my problems would float up and away. Unfortunately, Mr. Matus had just about had it with my sense of humor. Bobby, said Mr. Matus, if your homework is late one more time, your parents will come in and talk to the principal. Consider this fair warning. He walked up to the front of the class. My friend Willie gave me a thumbs up sign. I knew Willie liked the way I kept the jokes coming. Okay, class, said Mr. Matus. Back to history. The topic under discussion is Christopher Columbus, a hero or a villain? Two contradictory facts. He was a brilliant navigator and a courageous explorer, but he also exploited the Taino, the natives that he found in the West Indies. I want to hear your opinions, but remember, I want those opinions to be backed up by facts. Tyrone raised his hand. I think Columbus was a villain because when he met the Taino, the very first things he thought about was making them servants and about gold. But King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella sent him for gold, said Willie. You can't blame Columbus. He knew he'd be considered a failure if he didn't find gold. I shuffled through my book. I hadn't done the assignment. I felt Janine nudge me. Mr. Matus must have asked me a question. Bobby, he repeated, what's your opinion? About what? I asked. About Columbus, said Mr. Matus. He had that patient sound in his voice that teachers get when they're about to explode. I think he was a crook, I said. Okay, Bobby, said Mr. Matus. That's a very legitimate point of view. Do you think Columbus was a crook because he stole gold from the Taino? No, I said. Columbus was a crook because he double-crossed the Atlantic. He went back and forth 3 times. What a double-crosser, triple-crosser. He deserved to be hanged. Sometimes I just love my mind. I may have no memory for history or dates, but I can remember almost any joke I've ever heard. The class snickered. I could see a little smile on Mr. Matus's lips, but then the smile left his face. Bobby, do you really think that you can get away with this all year? He asked. Nah, I only got hired for 6 months. I tried to keep a straight face. 6 months, asked Mr. Matus. What do you mean, hired? The Board of Ed hired me. I'm actually a midget. They send me around to all new teachers to see who can cut it in New York City. The kids around me laughed. Everybody except Janine. I studied Mr. Matus's face. Had I gone too far? When I start making the people around me laugh, I don't want to stop. It's the soaringest feeling. Even when I know it will get me in trouble, I can't stop. All right, class, thanks to Bobby's outburst, we're going to end this discussion. Instead, we'll have a quiz. Please put away your books and write your name at the top of a piece of paper. A surprise quiz? I was going to flunk. I didn't know anything about Columbus. I threw my pencil in the air. Oh, no! You want us to remember our names? Talk about trick questions! The class started laughing again. Bobby, snapped Mr. Matus, enough is enough. It's not good for you, and it's not good for me to let you get away with this. The last thing I needed was another note from school saying that I was in trouble. My father would go ballistic. I'm sorry, Mr. Matus, I added quickly. I was out of line. Yes, you were, said Mr. Matus. And you'll go to the principal's office and try to explain to her why you didn't do your homework. Go. I got up. Willie was giggling, but Janine looked concerned. I hated the idea of Mr. Matus being genuinely angry at me. I also despise going to the principal's office. Sometimes it seems like I spend more time there than I do in class.